Hey everyone, Fire Emblem games have gold, and that is a topic that we haven't really discussed often in the fandom, so let's talk about it for the next 30 minutes, shall we? I'm going to go over every Fire Emblem game released up to this point, and we will discuss the various applications and intricacies of gold. Along the way, hopefully we'll be able to answer what makes gold management interesting, and what doesn't. Speaking of which, let's start with Fire Emblem, Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light. The very first Fire Emblem game, initially released on the Nintendo Famicom, somewhat recently re-released on the Switch, and slightly more recently pulled from the Switch eShop because Nintendo is cool like that. If you have this relic of a game available to you, then I would recommend trying it out, at least for a bit. And if you do, you'll find that a lot of things that we consider staples of the series nowadays have been present ever since the beginning, including gold and a lot of ways to obtain and spend it. There are three ways for Marth and his army to get some cash. The first one is villages. Marth can visit a village to warn the inhabitants of an incoming bandit attack, and as a thank you, the villages might give him some gold. The second is by fighting in the arena. This works almost exactly like it does in later installments. You enter the arena with a character that you think is going to win, and you put some money on it. If your character loses, the mean-looking bookmaker keeps your money. If you win, he gives you your money back. Times 10. That's right, winnings are 10 to 1. I don't want to tell this guy how to run a business, in fact I don't want to get near him at all, but let's just say I have a rough idea why they changed this up a bit in later installments. The last way is by selling valuables. If you find any treasure that you don't have another use for, such as bullions, you can sell them at an armory or vendor for gold. And while you're there, you might as well spend it on buying stuff, which, hey, that is something we should discuss as well. In this game, all you can spend your money on are things from the shops. You've got your armories for weapons, you've got your vendor for tomes and items, and you've got secret shops for more exclusive things like limited stat boosters. It's simple, but it works. If there's one thing we need to say about FE1 and its gold system from an analytical standpoint, it's this. You get way too much gold. You get so much gold. Even if your Navarre isn't addicted to the arena, there really isn't a limit on how much you can buy, even if you want to get expensive weapons. When I played this game, I ran out of convoy space before I ran out of gold. Granted, the convoy only has room for 40 items in FE1, but still. Oh, and it costs 10 gold per use, but you can probably see why that's not really worth mentioning. Now, in my opinion, the whole point of having a currency in your game is to be a limited resource. It's supposed to make you think a bit about what you do with it. If the game gives you so much that you don't have to put any thought in what you're buying, then there might as well not be gold in the game at all. Fortunately, we are only at the first entry in the Fire Emblem series, and it doesn't take too long for the game designers to start experimenting more with gold supply and demand. But first, Fire Emblem Gaiden. Fire Emblem Gaiden is the only game in the series that has no currency system whatsoever. That's probably why it also has no armories or vendors, because why set up shop in a place that has no concept of money? Instead, weapons and accessories are simply provided through other ways, such as by coming in a character's initial inventory or from a chest. Since all weapons have infinite durability, there is no need to replace broken ones like in the original. You might call it boring, but the choice to not have gold or shops in a game is still a choice. Of course, Shadows of Valentia, the 3DS remake of Gaiden, added money right back in, but we'll get to that later. Fire Emblem Mystery of the Emblem. It's a double package, containing both a remake of the OG Fire Emblem as well as a sequel. These are respectively called Book 1 and, would you believe it, Book 2. FE3's gold system is mostly a copy of FE1 with some small changes for the better. The convoy doesn't cost 1 gold per use anymore, and the arena's payout is significantly lowered. Before we move on to the next game though, I would like to zoom in on one aspect that's been present in both FE1 and FE3, and that is Anna's secret shop. In these hidden shops you can buy valuable and rare items. I think these are the key to making gold interesting, because the items obtained here cost a lot of gold, but they're also often very useful. So they give the player something to think about. Do I want to spend my money here and now on the secret shop, knowing I won't be able to visit it again in the future? Or do I keep some gold for shops that I'll be encountering in future chapters? For example, in Book 2, there is a very early secret shop in Chapter 5 that sells all the promotion items. Most of those won't be available for a couple more chapters, let alone more than one per type. The option to promote a unit as early as Chapter 5 is very powerful, but 10,000 gold is also quite a steep price. Similarly, Chapter 11 of Book 2 has a secret shop that sells dragon slaying weapons. Chapter 11 is the first of a stretch of chapters where you'll be facing a lot of dragon enemies, so there's a nice short-term benefit to shopping here. And then my favorite, just because it's funny, Chapter 14 has a shop that sells various dragon stones that you can give to your newly recruited Manakete, Tiki, including ones that you would think would be accessible to enemies only, like the Ice and Demon Dragon stones. The problem is, they cost a massive 18,000 gold. Are these funnies worth your monies? Fortunately, the cost of these is offset a little bit by the silver card, an item you usually obtain around halfway through the game. When carrying this item, a unit can buy items at half price. This mitigates the steep cost of the expensive gear quite a bit, but it also introduces an interesting dilemma of its own. If you're at a shop in the early game and you know you're getting the silver card later, how much do you buy? You want your weapons now, but you're also going to be able to buy them at half price later. If you want to save money, you'll have to try and buy just enough to get by until you can shop with the silver card. These are the kinds of intricacies that make an in-game currency meaningful and interesting, and we'll explore more of these in future games. But before the series can explore further down the same path, it takes a hard left with Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War. FE4's differences from the rest of the series need no introduction, but this video is going to give you one anyway because that's the whole point. The system FE4 has for gold is by far the most unique take on it in the entire series, so let's get cracking. In all the other entries, all of the players' gold is in one giant pool. It can be spent or added to by any unit, as if their giant bag of gold is teleporting all over the place. In Genealogy, however, every unit has their own wallet, with many ways to gain or lose gold. First of all, there's the usual villages to save. In FE1 and FE3, Marth could visit a village and get a reward for it, usually gold, an item, or a recruitable character. In FE4, any character can visit a village, and every village hands out a sum of gold, the amount depending on how quick you were at saving it. A village completely untouched by bandits gives you 5,000 gold. However, every turn a brigand spends their turn on a village, they will burn it down bit by bit, and for every turn they get to do that, the reward is reduced by 500 gold. For you Fates players out there, imagine the boat map in Conquest, you know, the one where you fight Shura, but instead that map is every village. If a village is under attack for 10 turns, it is completely burnt down and you cannot visit it anymore. Speaking of Shura, sometimes a village has an item to give to you in addition to the gold. In those cases, you really want to make sure you make it there in time, since the item will be lost if you don't. Another way a unit can earn money is through the arena. Unlike in other games, the arena is not an infinite resource of death matches. Instead, every arena gauntlet has 7 opponents of increasing difficulty level, which are set in stone based on what chapter you are in. Once a character has defeated all 7 opponents, they have cleared the arena and they can no longer enter it. The stakes are much lower. If your character loses, they don't die, but they're simply left at 1 hit point. Thanks, Kaga! There's also no actual wager, just a reward if you win. This reward starts at 1000 gold for the character participating and increases with 500 gold for every dub. For the 7th and final stage, your character earns 4000 gold, so if a character clears the entire arena, they earn 17,500 gold for themselves. So how can you spend all these hard-earned money? Let's get the small things out of the way first. FE4 doesn't have forts or other terrain where you can heal your HP for free. But if you sit on top of a castle for a turn, you'll gain about 20% of your health back, and if you sit on top of a church, you'll recover all of your HP. Both of these cost 5 gold per 1 HP recovered. A very exciting amount, I know. A little more money is spent on weapon upkeep. FE4 is more environmentally friendly than other games. While Marth and his army are constantly throwing away old weapons and buying new ones, Sigurd can simply ask the armorer at any castle town to repair his old sword and make it as good as new. Most weapons have 50 uses, and so they'll need repairing once per chapter or so. The cost per use is the same as if you were buying a new weapon. This means you can be using the same weapon for the entire game, and in fact, the game incentivizes you to do this. Every time you kill an enemy, the game adds +1 to your weapon's kill count. If a weapon reaches 50 kills, it will gain the ability to critical, something most characters cannot normally do. And once you've reached that 50 kill threshold, every additional kill on that weapon will give that character +1% chance to crit until it maxes out at 100 kills. So not only is recycling your old weapons good for the environment, but it also makes your characters more powerful. Of course, you can buy new equipment as well. In fact, if your friend in the army has a weapon or ring you want to buy, you're going to have to, because Genealogy has no free trading. If you want to put a piece of equipment on a different unit, it has to be sold to the pawn shop at half price and then bought back with that other unit at full price.
I'm Rick Harrison, and this is my pawn shop. I work here with my old man and my son, Big Hoss. Everything in here has a story and a price. One thing I've learned after 21 years, you never know what is going to come through that door.
This can be pretty expensive. There is a ring called the Paragon Band that costs 40,000 gold to buy, and units can only carry around a maximum of 50,000 gold. But simply holding that band will double a unit's XP gain in battle, so it's absolutely worth it to try and pass it around. Optimizing the use of the Paragon Band is one of the most interesting things about FE4, and it's the most important item by far if you're going to attempt a ranked run. There are ways to offset the cost of pricey items like the Paragon Band though. Like most other games, Genealogy features thieves, such as Dew. There are no chests or stealable items in Genealogy, but Dew manages to be one of the most useful units in the game regardless, because he can steal money. Every time he attacks an enemy, he takes all of their gold and adds it to his own gold pool. Some enemies run around with as much as 5,000 gold in their pockets. Like most thieves, Dew isn't very good at fighting at the start of the game, so this can be a risky affair, but it's very rewarding. Especially because Dew can spread his wealth around. Not only can Dew steal from the rich, but he can also give to the poor. Whenever he's near another unit, he has the option to give them all of his gold. So even if a unit finds themselves unable to make ends meet through visiting villages or fighting in the arena, they can get their hands on some money. Dew has another interesting skill in Bargain. This skill allows him to purchase items at half price, so he can buy things for the same price that he can sell them for, effectively allowing him to borrow items from the shop. These can be powerful weapons or items that he needs to win a battle in the arena, or it can be that Paragon Band to max out his XP gain. Thanks to this skill, he has more money left that he can give to other units. There is a lot more I can say about FE4 and its golden item system, but that about covers the basics. If we ever get a remake of this fantastic game, I hope it keeps this system intact. It's part of its core identity and it's really fun to mess around with. If you've never played this game, it might seem strange to see such praise for a system that limits what you can do with your item and gold so much, but I think that limitations often inspire creativity in players, and FE4 is a great example of why that is. Speaking of great, Fire Emblem Thracia 776. After Genealogy departed from the usual gold formula, Thracia came right back to it. One gold pool, you replace old weapons by buying new ones, you can freely trade weapons around, and so on. It's an almost exact copy of all later games in that regard, with one big exception: you have no money. Nothing is free in Thracia. If you want something, you're going to have to earn it. Thracia follows the journey of Leif, the Lord of Leonster who has lost almost everything, and he spends almost the entire game on the run from a big Imperial army, with only a small group of rebels helping him. So it's fitting that one of the primary ways to obtain gear is by taking it from the enemy. And I don't mean kill them and they'll drop their item, which was present in all previous entries. In Thracia, you can capture your enemies. The way it works is as follows. When you're about to engage the enemy, you have two options: attack or capture. Both of them will result in a round of combat happening, but with some key differences in what happens if you reduce the enemy to 0 HP. If you attack, the enemy dies, you know, the usual. But if you capture, your unit will instead forcibly rescue the enemy, and you can then trade their equipments to your own units before releasing them again. Now, why would you ever kill an enemy instead of capturing them? Well, when you're trying to capture an enemy, the game will cut all of your relevant combat stats in half, other than HP and luck, so your unit will be weaker and less reliable. Fortunately, Thracia gives the player access to some strong units and weaponry to make this process easier. Brave weapons, such as the Brave Axe and Finn's Brave Lance, make capturing a lot smoother. It's also worth noting that while you're holding on to an enemy or an allied unit, your stats stay cut in half, kind of like how in later games your skill and speed are halved while rescuing. You can't just capture every enemy, and even if you could, I wouldn't recommend it. A unit can only capture an enemy with less constitution. So generally, the beefier units will be easier to capture with, and beefier enemies such as bosses will be harder to capture. Some enemies cannot be captured at all. Mounted units have an easy time capturing because they are treated as if they have 20 constitution, so they can capture any foot unit. And in reverse, you generally cannot capture a mounted enemy. Beyond capturing, Thracia has another way of relieving enemies of their stuff: playable thieves. Thieves have been in Fire Emblem for a while now, but Thracia thieves are something else. Beyond the lockpicking that they can do in FE1, they now also have the ability to steal. When a thief is adjacent to an enemy they outspeed, they have the option to steal from them. Any item you see is yours for the taking, but in this game specifically, you can also take weapons. However, your thief's build does need to be higher than the weapon you are trying to get your hands on. For example, the first thief you get in Thracia, Lithis, is able to take some of the lighter tomes and swords at base, but not much else. As he grows though, he may get lucky and level up his build stat, which opens up more options for him to take. So between capturing and stealing, it sounds like the entire enemy's inventory is at your feet if you want it to be, and it would be fair to think that Thracia's economy cannot be all that interesting. After all, if you can steal everything that is not nailed down and get nearly infinite money and equipment, how can this be any more intricate than FE1's inflated economy? Now, I am a big fan of Thracia 776, I love this game to death, but thinking about this honestly, there's only one facet of this game's economy that's interesting, and it's related to another Thracia mechanic called fatigue. As a character fights, steals, heals or dances in Thracia, they build up fatigue. If during battle preparations a character has more fatigue than they have HP, they are too tired to go to battle. And if you have them sit on the bench for a chapter, their fatigue will reset to 0 and they will be available again for the next one. But sometimes you really want someone available for multiple maps in a row, and the option for them to sit out is so bad that you want a different solution. This is especially the case for staff users. Not only do staff users have less HP than most combat units, they also accumulate fatigue faster. Not to mention they are in lower supply and higher demand due to all the unique utility they provide. That is when the S-Drink item comes in. Give one of these to a fatigued unit and they reset their fatigue to 0 regardless of how worn out they were. The problem though is that S-Drinks are rare. You get a couple of them for free, but not nearly as many as you would like to have. Fortunately, they are buyable, but they're also really expensive at 5,000 gold per bottle. And you don't have the silver card or the bargain skill during the only 2 chapters where you can buy these S-Drinks. So the best way to maximize the amount you can buy is by selling everything you won't need, which requires some clever management. You don't want to sell things you will end up needing later, but you don't want to hoard things you will never end up using. And those kinds of dilemmas are what we're looking for here. That said, unfortunately there isn't really any other moment like this in Thracia. There is a secret shop late game, but it's not a very rewarding one. First of all, it's very difficult to reach. You need the member card, which is only obtainable by doing an extremely tedious side quest in the already tedious chapter where you recruit Xavier, and your reward is that you get to buy stat boosters, at a point in the game where you can expect most of your units to not need or want many. Thracia caps most stats at 20 for all units, and most of the units you've trained will have hit that cap for important stats like strength, magic, and speed. So, while usually shops with rare items like stat boosters are a great incentive to stay on top of gold management throughout the game, Thracia doesn't really incentivize it enough beyond the S-Drink shops. But worry not, because there is a game that manages to make money matters matter all the way through, and that is Fire Emblem, the Binding Blade. You might know that one of the very first houses in FE6 tells the player that money is important, but you're about to find out just how well that applies to the Binding Blade. It takes some of the elements that made previous games more interesting and applies them almost perfectly. The first thing FE6 does very well is sprinkling shops with costly, desirable items all over the game. For example, in Chapter 11 and Chapter 13, you can buy killer weapons. These are highly useful because enemies in FE6 are really tanky, especially on the highest difficulty, and these killer weapons have some of the best hit rates in the game. Being able to buy these in bulk is a massive boon. But you don't want to splurge all of your gold on these, because in Chapter 14 you obtain the good old silver card to slash prices in half, and you get another opportunity to buy killer weapons later during the Ilias Arcade route split, so ideally you budget just enough to get by up until then. But wait, there is more. Chapter 16 Secret Shop sells promotion items which are in very short supply in this game. If you are using multiple units that use the same promotion item, you're definitely going to want to visit this one. But even if you're not, you can buy angelic robes here to increase the durability of some of your characters at the low cost of 4,000 gold apiece, assuming you have the silver card. And finally, in terms of great shops, there is the Chapter 21 Secret Shop, which sells every stat booster in the game, including boots, which increase a unit's movement. Normally, Fire Emblem only gives you one pair of boots, sometimes a couple more, but this game sells an infinite amount, allowing you to cap any character's movement at 15. This turns the last couple of chapters from a slog into a race to the finish, as your characters zip across the map in no time at all. The brilliance of shops like this one is that they work regardless of whether gold is scarce or in abundance. As long as there's a high demand of what's being sold, anything you can convert into 4,000 gold becomes valuable enough to chase. Gold in FE6 isn't exactly rare, there's easily obtainable gems and other high value treasures all over the place. Like that Knight Crest you get from a village in Chapter 21, if any of your cavaliers are still unpromoted, they've got bigger problems, but you can still sell that crest for 5,000 gold and get another pair of boots out of it. And if you don't care about boots, well, there's probably some stat booster you like. Maybe you'll want some energy rings to fix a character that got strength screwed, or some speed wings to turn a normally slow character into a speed demon. It's up to you. There is a lot to criticize the Binding Blade for, but gold management is an aspect this game absolutely nails. You've got well-balanced incentives to both spend and hold on to your gold, in a way that rewards knowledgeable players for planning ahead, but without intimidating newer players in a way that causes decision paralysis. In my opinion, this is a peak in the history of Fire Emblem Gold economy. Now, I'm calling it a peak and not a stepping stone because, well, let's talk about FE7. So, most people know FE7 as the game that Lyn is bad in, or perhaps the game with a story worse than my son's, but what is there to say about gold in the Blazing Blade? Well, not too much. The game takes a similar approach to its predecessor, which is a promising start. We've got some shops that might seem familiar. Again, we have two places to purchase killer weapons. A secret shop in Dragon's Gate and an armory in Unfulfilled Heart. That's good, but these are way less interesting because they are both after the player got the silver card. So the decision making is much less complex here. You buy all you can carry because they're dirt cheap. Only around 600 gold each after the discount, and this game is even more generous with gold than FE6 was. In fact, what's more interesting about these shops is their location. The Unfulfilled Heart Armory is located in the top right of the map, and in Hector mode, that's also where Vida is waiting patiently for 11 turns. After that, she will begin her retreat and the map is over. Vida is the most powerful and dangerous boss in the game, with stats equivalent to a capped out Wyvern Lord thanks to her Uber Spear, and she can attack safely from 10 tiles away thanks to her flight and 1-2 range. Getting to that armory safely is a real challenge. In fact, I'd say that's the most exciting and interesting part of this map in the first place. That said, the fact that the armory is a challenging side objective doesn't really make gold management more interesting. In fact, I would argue the opposite. Because that armory is so hard to get to, you're even more incentivized to buy all the killer weapons you'll ever need in Dragon's Gate, and that way you won't have to bother at all. If you were more limited in what you could buy in Dragon's Gate, for example because you had less gold to work with, then you would have a real need for that second armory. FE7 puts a lot of gold between Dragon's Gate and that armory. For example, Louise's White Gem and the free Ocean Seal from the desert map alone add up to 35,000 gold if you sell them both. But because you already get so much gold in the maps before Dragon's Gate, and because you get the silver card, it doesn't really matter. The other reason that FE7 doesn't hold a candle to FE6 in this regard is that there is no use for all this gold after the killer weapon shop. There are some late game secret shops, but they don't really get you anything interesting or useful. Nothing like boots or other stat boosters, just random promotion items that only 1 or 2 characters can use, or rare weapons that never come in useful. And then FE7 enemies are weaker than FE6 enemies, while FE7 player units are stronger than FE6 player units, so upgrading your weaponry isn't as rewarding. The best weapons in this game are the javelin and the hand axe, and those you can buy in almost every armory, for cheap. FE7 is a nice and simple game, and its economy reflects that. You can just go through it, buy whatever you feel like buying at the time, and that's okay. But I think previous games, especially the Binding Blade, show that it's possible to make things more interesting. Let's see if that goes better in Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones. Now, if you heard me ragging on FE7's economy, you might expect that my rant on the Sacred Stones will follow a similar tune. And if I limited myself to talking about Sacred Stones the way I generally play it, it definitely would be. So yes, if you right now were to play Sacred Stones as if it's FE7, you would have way more money than you would know what to do with, as the game simply doesn't give you anything worth watching your wallet for. There is a shop around the middle of the game that sells elixirs for 3,000 gold each, which is somewhat expensive, but not expensive enough that you cannot pick up all you need. That, and there's a special catch in Sacred Stones. It has a world map, so you can go back and forth and visit previous shops at any point. Sure, sometimes the game throws in optional encounters that try to get in your way, but you can just defeat them, or enter the battle and then retreat. It's not a real barrier. This makes the elixir vendor even more boring, because even if you didn't have enough money when you first unlocked it, you can always revisit it later after you got yourself a new gold dump. Heck, you can even wait until you get the silver card and then come back to it, so you get none of that FOMO goodness that the previous games introduced with these shops. The only type of shop that cannot simply be visited from the world map is the secret shop, but just like in FE7, these do not sell anything special enough to be worth the trouble. In the English version, that is. Interestingly enough, the Japanese version has a very different secret shop in Chapter 19, Last Hope, where you can buy stat boosting items. It bears a striking resemblance to FE6's boot shop, except it doesn't sell any boots. Still, it's more exciting than anything we have in the English version. At the very least, it's a side objective worth looking at if you're looking to turn one of your stat screwed units into a super soldier. For those of you keeping count, with FE8, that brings our total number of Fire Emblems discussed to 8. And if my amazing editor Davis has worked at his usual pace, that's about half the mainstream emblems we currently have, give or take a promise. So that seems like a good place to wrap up this first part. Yeah, that's right, I'm doing this in 2 parts. Part 2 is still in the works, but unfortunately Davis is unable to help me with editing it, and all my other editors are occupied. So if you're interested in video editing and you would like to help me create more videos like this one, send me an email at this address. Let me know your prior experience in editing, maybe include some examples of your previous work, but most importantly, let me know your rates and I'll try to get back to you. But before I leave you, let's do a quick recap of the lessons that we have learned so far, right? Lesson number 1, if gold is infinite, then it's not interesting. FE1 shows us that if it's impossible or almost impossible to spend all of your gold, then it might as well not be there. Lesson number 2, temporarily available shops with rare, costly and useful items, such as secret shops, make gold much more interesting, even if there's technically a lot of gold available. Examples of this include the S-Drink vendors in Thracia and the boot secret shop in the Binding Blade. But Genealogy's item system also keeps gold relevant, since you need gold to swap powerful items between characters. At their very core, what we can see is that supply and demand have to be carefully balanced. It's okay to give the player a lot of gold to work with, as long as the game keeps giving them something useful to spend it on. If you don't, then you end up in a game like FE7 or FE8, where you kinda just buy a load of generic weapons whenever you come at a shop and hope you don't run out until you see the next one. There is so much more to say on this topic, but before we delve into these depths, I need to have a clear picture of the rest of the franchise, so stay tuned for part 2. If you don't want to miss it, you can and should subscribe and hit the bell. And now, I'm going to read out a bunch of names for some reason, and I wonder why. Zelda, Vincent Cutie, The Vala Agenda, Scott Mitchell, Schmeep, Peeve Ladias, Moo, Curaçao, Ice Lake, D, Crimson Blader, Boots42, Blue Caterade, Ben Dion, Baku, Ark Holt, Anthony, Grant Johnson, Jagan, and Abaddon 1810, and Modi.